What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to discuss Baldur's Gate 3, which is coming to the PC on August 3rd. And when it comes to this game, it's tough to know where to start because there's a lot that I want to say. But let me just say this first. If you are a fan of the fantasy genre in any form, from fiction to video games to tabletop RPGs or just kick-ass Frank Frazetta art, there's a very good chance that you're going to share my opinion that this game, at least from what I've seen so far, this game is an absolute masterpiece, and I think it's perhaps going to be the best fantasy experience to be had in any form of media in 2023. And it's that rare experience where the game feels incredibly modern, incredibly new, absolutely on the cutting edge of gaming development and innovation, but also it incorporates all the best ingredients, all the classic ingredients of Dungeons & Dragons, like old school tabletop RPGs, going back to the early 80s when I first got started in that world. And I'll be getting to more of those details in a sec, but to start, let me just clarify that at this point, I've played the early access version of the game several times through. It's a ton of content. And I've also been feasting on all the latest videos by Larian Studios, as well as gaming channels like Vextra Life and Wolfheart FPS. And both of those channels have had a lot more access to the game than I've had. So if you've already watched all of their videos, you're going to find nothing new here. But this video is for the unconverted out there, but more specifically, the diehard fantasy fans who live for the genre, but who might not yet have this game on their radar. Maybe you played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 many years ago, but you've drifted away from PC gaming. Or maybe you're just all in on old school tabletop RPGs with your friends around a table, eating potato chips, rolling dice, etc. Or maybe like me, you've been frustrated recently by so many lackluster, bland, interchangeable fantasy shows that we've been subjected to. Shows like Willow, The Wheel of Time, The Witcher, and of course, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. All of those shows are what I would describe as like genre killers. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're bringing some new fans into the genre, but when it comes to the best the fantasy genre has to offer, I would not start anybody on any of those shows. However, I still consider myself very well fed. House of the Dragon is absolutely incredible. Novelists like Joe Abercrombie are still cranking out amazing books. And we've recently seen the release of brilliant games like Elden Ring. And speaking of Elden Ring, we're already seeing a similar phenomenon with Baldur's Gate 3 that we saw with Elden Ring, where rival developers are essentially criticizing Baldur's Gate 3 for being too good and setting up unrealistic expectations for all their shitty pay-to-win games that are floating around out there. But for me, this game is precisely the shot in the arm that I need right now. Like the summer movie season's just been an absolute train wreck on the whole, with a few exceptions. So I was just in desperate need of like a really killer experience in this genre that I've loved so dearly my entire life. So let's start with a few of the basics. Baldur's Gate 3 has been in development for a long time by Larian Studios, and these are the people who gave us Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2. I only played part 2, but if you love that, you're going to love Baldur's Gate 3. And what's amazing is how Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely feels like a classic Larian game in terms of like their format and like what their fans expect. But at the same time, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is the best adaptation of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that we will likely ever see, and that includes advantage and disadvantage, inspiration, feats, bonus actions, reactions, death saving throws. All that crap is in here, and if you're one of my players, you might be scratching your head because I'm constantly talking shit about 5th edition in favor of 1st edition and 2nd edition, which I love dearly, mostly because just the art and the style of modules and adventures are much more to my taste. But also when it comes to 5th edition D&D and their owner, Wizards of the Coast, and their whole approach to tabletop gaming, they seem to be doing nothing but like apologizing for all the great content of the past as they try and drain the fantasy genre of all the death, murder, and frankly, wonderfully problematic content that makes fantasy so hardcore and so exciting. And it feels like Larian Studios, at a minimum, they get the appeal of the fantasy genre right down to its DNA. In essence, they've put all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll back into the game while at the same time offering one of the most innovative and kick-ass turn-based strategy games imaginable. I mean, once again, the game feels absolutely on the cutting edge, incredibly modern, incredibly new, like a major step forward for RPG gaming. And the channel Vextra Life already said this first, but I'll go ahead and echo their opinion. This is a strong Game of the Year contender. The same way Elden Ring dominated last year, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is going to dominate this year, at least for like the RPG connoisseurs out there, because not only does the game offer an enormous amount of content to be explored, it also offers the player like basically an infinite number of ways to creatively explore that content in terms of like the customization of their own characters. But when it comes to problem solving or role playing or combat, like there's so many opportunities for the players to utilize their own creativity and their own unique form of problem solving, where every single player is going to have a completely different experience in terms of how they tackle all these problems they'll encounter over the course of the game. And I think it's one of those games that could easily keep me like seriously entertained for a very long time. And I expect that my personal hygiene and my personal life and my professional life will all suffer as a result. It's one of those games where you'll find yourself constantly thinking about it, wanting to get back to it, no matter what you might be doing. So of all the things they get right with this game, let's start with the setting. I feel like Forgotten Realms fans have been spoiled rotten over the years, because not only are there tons of great novels out there, but 5th edition basically went all in on the Forgotten Realms, as does this series of games. Now, I love Forgotten Realms. I've read some great books. But when it comes to all the different campaign settings in D&D, I'm much more of a Dragonlance fan, Ravenloft fan, Greyhawk fan, and especially Dark Sun fan. But whatever, I'll take it. Forgotten Realms is still pretty goddamn cool. And contrary to Wizards of the Coast's current approach to the game, where they basically are trying to like rewrite things like Mind Flayers and Beholders to make them less problematic, this game leans all the way in onto the pure evil of the villains and lets them be insanely hardcore. And that was abundantly clear from the moment they started dropping cinematics back in 2019, which perfectly set the tone for the story. And as soon as I saw this first cinematic where you see this guy transforming in agonizing fashion into a Mind Flayer, I knew that Larian Studios was speaking my language. And without going into spoilers, I'll just say that a huge part of the story is whether or not the players are going to suffer a similar fate over the course of the adventure. But I also loved how grand and how epic the cinematics were. Like in the first 5 minutes, which has been available for years, you see the characters in the game traveling to multiple planes of existence. You get this epic battle between dragons and a Mind Flayer ship, all before turning loose the players inside a chamber of horrors, where basically captives of the Mind Flayers are suffering from some of the most horrific forms of torture imaginable. And for my money, Mind Flayers should always be absolutely fucking horrifying. They should be able to kill you in a round if you're unlucky. But no matter what classic D&D creatures you might love from the past, I feel like Baldur's Gate 3 does a great job of doing justice to all of them, from Githyanki to Gnolls to owlbears to drow to just full-blown devils. This game consistently delivers the coolest version of them imaginable. So if, like me, you're frustrated with the watered-down, safe, neutered, defanged, declawed approach of Wizards of the Coast these days, rest assured that Baldur's Gate 3 is going in the completely opposite direction. And along those lines, when it comes to the overall tone and flavor, the game gives us one incredible dramatic beat or scene after another, where basically the players have an a wide variety of solutions to problems and challenges. And no matter where you might find yourself in terms of like the spectrum of all the different like conceivable alignments, from lawful evil to chaotic good, gone are the days of having only 2 dialogue options, where basically you can choose to be a nice guy or a mean guy. Like that worked for like Knights of the Old Republic 20 years ago, but now you have this incredible narrative depth and like dramatic complexity, where the number of different story outcomes is just awe-inspiring. And according to Larian Studios, there are roughly 17,000 ways to finish the game, depending upon what decisions you make along the way, along with up to 174 hours of cutscenes and cinematics. So very few players out there are going to have the exact same narrative experience. And in just the first act of the game, the map is absolutely enormous. And I love how there's so many different types of landscapes to be explored, from like the Underdark, where you have like the drow, to old castle ruins, to caves, like you name it. And like with a lot of classic From Software games, the map allows you to have all these different shortcuts and options for opening up different parts of the game. So if your style of gameplay is to skip ahead to the most challenging things you can possibly face, you absolutely may do so, or you can take the long way and do full clears, which is much more my speed. And I can't emphasize this enough, but overall it just feels like you're in the driver's seat of this rich, detailed fantasy novel set in the Forgotten Realms, or just enjoying a really fierce D&D session with your friends around the table as you're debating what path to take. Because if you want to be the world's most persuasive, cunning diplomat, great. You can absolutely play that way. Or if you want to kind of like, seduce your way through all of Faerun, have at it. Actually, I should say this story has an almost embarrassing number of sexual options, no matter what your preferences might be on that front. Or if you just want to be the world's most bloodthirsty psychopath, carving a path of death through every single encounter and ripping out people's brains, the game totally embraces players who just want to go all in on the dark side. And what I love is how like the choices you make along the way, they really feel like they matter in terms of like what quests become available, which companions join your party. And also, just because someone joins your party doesn't mean that they're going to be with you for good. Like they might betray you, or they might lead the group, or they might try to kill you. Choices really matter in this game, which is going to give the game incredible replay value. Like for my part, I'm going to start with an Oathbreaker Paladin leading a band of psychopaths, but in my next playthrough on the highest difficulty setting, I'll probably play a bunch of like, pure and noble, like, kind of classic adventurers. But let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of the game, and what impressed me the most is how the game has managed the impossible of replicating the joys of rolling the 20-sided die. And I've got a set of dice here. And for people who don't play D&D or tabletop RPGs, the 20-sided die has been like the life's essence of the game and its appeal going back to the early 70s. And obviously you got the 12-sided die and the 10-sided. Like I'm not going to neglect those. But the 20-sided die is basically the game. You can't play it without it. Part of the fun of the game is the drama over wondering what the outcomes might be. And what's cool for me as someone who's a dungeon master who's used to having like ripped their brain in two trying to figure out what are all the relevant modifiers to determine a particular outcome, whether like a thief is trying to like disarm a trap, or if a barbarian's trying to kind of bluff and intimidate their way through a situation. The game does this cool thing where they'll show you based on ability scores and skills and advantage and disadvantage and whatever spell bonus you might have, but it will show you all your relevant modifiers, and then when you click the die to roll it, you're like, oh, like it gets exciting, wondering what the outcome might be. And I'll say in advance, embrace the occasional negative outcome. Like don't save the game and then roll the dice and then reload if you don't like the outcome. The story will lead you into strange and unexpected terrain if you embrace the occasional negative outcome, especially when it comes to NPC interactions, and then you can always play the game through again another time and have a completely different experience depending upon how the dice fall. And also I have to say that after years of indulging in the From Software style of gaming, I'm wearing a From Software shirt, and I love and adore Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and Sekiro, and Elden Ring and all that stuff. But I'm loving getting back into full-blown turn-based strategy gaming, which is a completely different experience, where it's much more like three-dimensional chess, where you're controlling 4 players in a uniquely interactive environment. And every single player has a wide range of skills that allow you to kind of interact with that environment, whether you're solving puzzles or dealing with difficult encounters. Like I would recommend everybody learn to think in a 3-dimensional way. Don't think horizontally, don't think vertically. Think totally 3D and learn how to use it to your advantage, because like a bottomless pit of death, it might kill you the first time if you happen to stumble into it, but try casting Featherfall and then jumping in. You might discover a completely new zone or a shortcut to a zone that you've already discovered. And the environment is not just for scenery or for looks. Like you can manipulate it. Like if you're having a battle alongside of a cliff, you can just push somebody off the cliff and kill them. Like if you have a spellcaster who's out of spells, you can still push people. Or you can leap up to a ledge where no one can hit you. Or you can knock over a barrel of oil and set it on fire. Or knock over statues and crush your enemies. Like, don't think of your players exclusively like, oh, this is my fighter, so he always has to use his two-handed sword. And this is my wizard, so he always has to cast magic missile. Definitely take advantage of the environment, because if you think strategically, like some encounters will just be a full like total party kill the first time you try it. But if you make 1 or 2 changes depending upon your environment, suddenly you might find yourself just breezing through the environment or breezing through the encounter without even breaking a sweat. And this will come as no surprise to anybody who's played some of Valerian Studios' other games, but the combat is almost too good or almost too fun, where I find myself, like I'm so eager to get back into the combat that I find myself like skipping through dialogue options too quickly or skipping through cinematics. Slow down, embrace it, embrace the story options, embrace the cinematics, because also, if you lean into the dialogue and all the details of the quests, I would say most of the quests that I've done so far, if you see them through to their conclusion, they're incredibly rewarding. Like it's easy to get overwhelmed, like, oh my God, I've got like 50 different ongoing quests going in different directions. Try and focus on a few kind of plot threads at a time, and suddenly you'll find yourself finding like really kick-ass magic items, or like, unlocking really cool story beats. Don't just be a murder hobo. But once again, if you want to play it as a murder hobo, that is a totally viable option. But there are a few more gaming mechanics to keep in mind. At launch, the game's going to be a little different from the early access, because now players are going to have a lot more options when it comes to building their characters. Obviously, more races and more classes, but in the early access, like your ability scores were, or at least your ability score bonuses were dependent upon what race you chose. Now you can basically have any race class combo that you like, where you're going to have the same number of ability scores to distribute no matter what path you take. And I'm a little more old school. Like I'm playing Dark Sun right now with my tabletop campaign. And there, if you play a half giant, you have a massive bonus to strength over the other races, but you're also really fucking big and it's hard to get through doorways, and like you take more damage from people that are wielding certain weapons. So there are pros and cons to picking certain races, but I can tell what this game is striving for. They want you to be able to play the exact race class combo that you like while having the same potential for maximizing your power. I mean, if you make bad decisions in terms of your skills and ability scores, like that's on you. But every player or every combo has the same potential. And as far as level progression goes, it's super old school in the best possible way. Levels matter. Like in D&D, it used to take, depending upon your campaign, it might take you 3 or 4 sessions to pass a single level. So when you pass, like, woohoo! Like it really matters, and you get new spells and new abilities, and you really feel like you've reached certain benchmarks. I can't stand games where you just burn your way through like dozens, if not hundreds of levels, and have a bunch of stats that are up in the hundreds, if not thousands, where the stats, they cease to mean anything. Like, I need to, put all my points into intelligence, blah, 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 but you stop thinking about the numbers. In this, you will know what your stats are. Like you'll know if you're a fighter, if you have strength 16 or if you have strength 18, you will feel the difference. You will recognize the difference in terms of problem-solving options and damage. And when you pass from level 4 to level 5, like the differences are just massive in terms of number of attacks and spells that are available. And so I really like it when levels feel very impactful. So this approach is right up my alley. And as far as tips and advice go, I'll just say save early and save often. This game can be lethal at times. Like one of my biggest complaints about 5th edition is that it's too easy for players to kind of wiggle the way out of any situation that might be potentially fatal. I feel like when you hit 0 hit points, you should be unconscious, and if you hit -1, you should be dead. Like no death saving throws. And even though this game is used in 5th edition, sometimes you're going to encounter groups of bad guys that are just absolutely eviscerate you like in a single turn. And so if you're saving frequently and often, at a minimum, it'll give you the option of calling a mulligan if things just get too fatal too quickly. Also, loot everything. You're going to need food in this game for long rests. Like you can take 2 short rests after every long rest to get some hit points back. But in order for your party to rest at your camp, you need to have like food and that sort of thing. And there's shitloads of food in the game, like more than enough food to rest as often as you like. However, you do need to look in like boxes and chests and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, one of those random boxes or chests are going to have like, a kick-ass magic item or new scrolls or whatever the case might be. So you don't have to search everything. Like, once again, play exactly how you want to. But if you're one of those people that likes to look in every single box, you will be rewarded for the extra effort. Now, obviously, I love the game, and I'm dying to get through this review so I can get back to playing the game, even though I'm still stuck in early access mode. But I do have a few little minor quibbles or critiques or minor grievances, and who knows, a lot of these might be dealt with by the time the game launches, but here are my gripes as they stand. Like the big one, which I've noticed, and I think it's just a bug, occasionally when your players are climbing up a wooden ladder to get to like another level, all of a sudden your player will just go, oh, and he'll fall back down the ladder and rip it to pieces in the process. And sometimes that's the only way to get into a certain zone. I'm like, all right, well, now just because of a bug, I'm having to reload an earlier save. And if you haven't saved in like 20 minutes, that is a huge pain in the ass. So, like zone-breaking bugs definitely need to be eliminated. Another thing I don't like is some of the crafting. Like the crafting, it's not intuitive. Like I feel like when you're doing crafting, it should be very easy to use and very obvious. Like, oh, use these materials, put them together, boom, you got your potion, you got your sword or whatever. Just the interface, it just looks like clunky and awkward. And there are a few early quests that involve like making certain items. And there were a few times where I basically had to look up like, how the hell do you actually use a forge to put these things together? And I feel like the hard part should be finding the materials. It should not be, how do I use the actual forge to make it work? And another problem I had was with the action bar, where certain actions like jump, where you might be clicking it multiple times. It's real easy to drag an action out of your action bar and it just disappears. And it's like, well, shit, how do I get it back in there? And finding the actual icon again and then dragging it back down to the action bar was a huge pain in the ass. It took like 5 or 10 minutes just to find the jump icon again. And so you can lock the action bar to avoid that. But if you're a first-time player or have never played the Baldur's Gate series, you might be like, what the hell? Like, am I ever going to get to jump again? Like, this is ridiculous. So hopefully some of the action bar issues will be dealt with. Also, one thing I really missed from Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 was where you could basically just like create a box on the screen and grab your entire party and send them in the same direction or have them all attack the same target all at once. And now there's this really clunky thing, like say you take your thief, break him out of the group to sneak ahead to either like backstab somebody or just scout or whatever. When it comes time to regroup them, it's a really clumsy thing. We have to like click multiple buttons. You should just be able to grab your whole party all at once and boom, have them all go. But who knows? Maybe they will. Maybe they will deal with that. But speaking of the old school games, if you played, in the late '90s, the original Baldur's Gate, you will be happily delighted to see or to learn that little details, like even like the sound that like bears make when you click on them. Like, it's a very specific sound. A lot of those details have made their way into Baldur's Gate 3. So, like I said, feels like a Larian game, but it also really feels like a Baldur's Gate game. So in closing, let me just say that this is one of those rare games that feels really pure in its intentions. And what I mean by that, whether you're talking about a novel or a movie or a show or a game or whatever, a storytelling experience or a gaming experience or a media experience that feels unburdened by any other criteria or concerns apart from being the best version of itself that it can possibly be. Like, I can't stand games where you buy the game and suddenly, you've got the game, but in order to really fully appreciate it, you have to start, buying all this in-game merchandise with actual real money. Like, fuck that shit. For my money, I'm paying like $75 to $100 to buy these games. Once I buy it, I want the complete full experience, and I never want to have to think about money ever again, unless it's like finding gold in the game and buying that. But like, I feel like the moment I'm spending real money on a game while playing it, it takes me out of the experience, and I'm immediately pissed, and I feel like I'm getting squeezed, and I just don't like it. But this game, at least so far, I'm not aware of any sort of like pay-to-win cheat codes or anything like that. You just get to play the game and enjoy the insanely good writing, and I can't say it enough. The writing in this game is first rate, and I'm a big fan of running published modules, whether you're talking about like old school classics like the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, or friggin' like the Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan, or second edition modules. Like right now I'm running this giant campaign setting of the City by the Silt Sea, which is both a setting and a module set in Dark Sun. I'm absolutely loving it. And even if I'm not running a module, I do enjoy reading a great adventure. I read them the same way I would like a comic book. If it's well written, it's a great story, and you start imagining all the gaming possibilities. So trust me when I say this module absolutely kicks ass. And if you're wondering what the term module even means, for people who played D&D in the 70s and 80s, they were called modules, and then they started calling them adventures. It's definitely like a generation gap, but I grew up calling them modules. I will always call them modules. But this module, it rocks. It's just got so much drama, so much humor, so much darkness and savagery and mystery and legit, genuine sex appeal. I know some people get uncomfortable by the idea of a game that feels erotic and arousing, but this game is the full package, and you've got a lot of, let's just say, a lot of very progressive options on that front, no matter what your orientation might be. And if you want to keep the game pure, like if you want it just to be like a pure high fantasy epic adventure, you can. Like, your choices will lead the game into feeling like that. Or if you want the game to feel like a deranged, raunchy sex comedy, your choices will lead you in that direction. And I won't spoil the scene, but there was one outrageous moment involving two classic D&D creatures from the late 70s involved in the physical act of love, where I just started laughing so hard I about fell out of my fucking chair. And sometimes this weird kinky shit will lead to strange outcomes. Like, I found this one priest who had like this torture rack down in this goblin den, and I voluntarily subjected myself to being on the rack and being like whipped a few times. And suddenly I ended up with like this permanent buff based on like the god that this person worships. So yeah, feel free or try to keep an open mind when it comes to exploring some of the stranger outcomes. But I don't think I've ever played an RPG before that feels so nimble and flexible. Man, I love RPGs, whether you're talking about Fallout 4 or Elder Scrolls V Skyrim or whatever the case might be. Those games have incredible narrative complexity, but like quests feel like quests, and they tend to have a few options, but there's something about the way this game is structured where you just feel like you have so many different permutations and combinations in terms of possible outcomes. I've never felt like the storytelling was as organically flexible that in Baldur's Gate 3, and I think that's probably its most like awe-inspiring achievement overall. And because this game features multiple companions that can join your party, each of which has like a variety of like subplots and quests and story beats and that sort of thing, you cannot enjoy the entire game in one playthrough. So I'm really looking forward to like coming up with different like arrangements of the different NPCs, because some of the NPCs are more inherently evil than others. So, but thing is, they fight and they argue and they don't get along. And so once again, they're just like the options are limitless when it comes to how you're going to experience this. And I'm also hearing that when the game launches, we're going to have the ability to respec our companions, like in terms of what their specific class is or subclass. And I feel like once you've got the ability to respec your entire party, I mean, goddamn, like for people who love the game, who love experimenting with different builds and combos of like classes and races and that sort of thing, I feel like that is going to make this game have like enduring appeal for basically any D&D fan going back to the fucking mid-70s. But I think I've shamelessly heaped praise on this game enough at this point. I hope I've excited the curiosity of some people out there where Baldur's Gate 3 is not even on the radar. I mean, I feel like console games sometimes dominate too much of the conversation, but in the end, a great PC game. If you've had a great experience, like I would say this game represents to fantasy and D&D what Knights of the Old Republic represented to Star Wars back in the early 2000s, and that game still works, but it definitely feels of its time in terms of the role-playing options. But it was a total game changer. It was a giant leap forward. And without that, you don't get Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, which are some of my all-time favorite games. And I feel like the doors that are being opened by Baldur's Gate 3 potentially could lead to even more awe-inspiring RPG experiences. And so it's just great when you get to experience a seismic shift in real time, especially the summer movie season's drawing to a close. I don't have any cool shows to watch right now. Like this game's coming along at the perfect time to keep me entertained basically all of August. And in the fall, we've got a bunch of cool flicks coming our way, like Dune Part 2 or Killers of the Flower Moon or The Killer or Napoleon. And obviously we'll have some fall shows. But and also in terms of games, we've got friggin' Starfield coming as well. But I feel like for the rest of the summer, Baldur's Gate is going to keep me very happily entertained. And so for that, I'm very, very grateful. So check out the game. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I just can't wait to do a deeper dive when this game launches on August 3rd. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, hit that notification bell to be notified about future videos. And more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.